The injured mare's blood trail led Cole through the blizzard to an abandoned cabin, but it was the desperate message carved into the table that stopped his heart. Someone was dying in these mountains, and the wild horse somehow knew exactly where to find help. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The December wind cut through the Montana high country like a blade forged from ice itself, carrying with it the promise of a blizzard that would bury the valley before nightfall. Cole Whitaker sat astride his white mare, Snowdrift, scanning the tree line for any sign of the missing cattle that had wandered from his winter pasture. At 42 years old, he had spent more than half his life working this land, and he knew better than most that winter in these mountains showed no mercy to the unprepared or the unlucky. The sky overhead was the color of old pewter, heavy with unshed snow, and the temperature had been dropping steadily since dawn. Cole pulled his sheepskin coat tighter around his shoulders and adjusted the worn leather gloves that had belonged to his father. The Whitaker Ranch stretched across 15,000 acres of some of the most beautiful and unforgiving country in the territory, land that his grandfather had claimed in the 1870s, when Montana was still wild enough to kill a man for making a single mistake. 3 generations of Whitakers had worked this soil, survived these winters, and built something lasting from the raw materials of courage and stubborn determination. Now Cole was the last of the line, unmarried and childless, though at his age most folks had stopped asking when he planned to settle down and start a family. The missing cattle were Herefords, 6 head that had somehow found a way through the fence during the night. Cole had discovered their absence during the morning feed, and tracking them through the fresh snow had brought him farther into the high country than he had intended to venture with the storm approaching. He should turn back, head for the warmth and safety of the ranch house before the weather turned deadly, but the thought of losing those cattle, each one representing a significant investment and months of careful breeding, kept him pushing forward into the wilderness. Snowdrift picked her way carefully through the deepening drifts, her breath forming white plumes in the frigid air. She was a good horse, steady and reliable, the kind of animal a man could trust with his life in country like this. Cole had raised her from a foal, and the bond between them ran deeper than mere training or obedience. She seemed to sense his moods, responded to the slightest shift in his weight or touch of the reins, and had saved his life more than once by finding her way home through conditions that would have left him hopelessly lost. The forest around them was silent, except for the whisper of wind through the pine branches and the soft crunch of hooves breaking through the snow crust. It was the kind of silence that spoke of hidden dangers, of predators watching from the shadows, of nature holding its breath before unleashing its fury. Cole had learned long ago to trust his instincts in the backcountry, and right now those instincts were telling him that something was wrong. The cattle tracks he had been following seemed to lead deeper into the wilderness rather than circling back toward lower ground as he had expected. It was unusual behavior for livestock, who typically sought shelter and familiar territory when storms threatened. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the winter stillness. A horse's whinny, high-pitched and distressed, coming from somewhere ahead through the trees. Cole reined Snowdrift to a halt and listened intently. There it was again, unmistakable now, a sound of pain and fear that made something tighten in his chest. Wild horses were rare in this part of Montana, most of the Mustang herds having been driven out or captured decades ago. But occasionally, a few still roamed the most remote valleys. He urged Snowdrift forward, following the sound through a stand of lodgepole pines, whose branches hung heavy with accumulated snow. The terrain grew rougher, rocky outcroppings jutting up through the white blanket like the bones of the earth itself. And then he saw the horse, a magnificent chestnut mare tangled in what appeared to be old barbed wire, her coat dark with sweat despite the cold, her eyes rolling white with panic and pain. Cole dismounted carefully, speaking in low, soothing tones as he approached. The mare was wild. That much was clear from her response to his presence. But she was also exhausted and injured badly enough that she didn't have the strength to flee. The barbed wire had wrapped around her right foreleg and chest, cutting deep into the flesh. And from the trampled snow around her, it was obvious she had been fighting the trap for hours, possibly since the night before. This was no accident. As Cole examined the wire more closely, he realized it was part of a deliberate snare, old and rusted but still deadly effective. Someone had set this trap, though whether for horses or other animals he couldn't tell. What he did know was that such trapping was illegal on public land, and this particular piece of mountain belonged to the federal government, not to any private rancher who might claim the right to protect his property. The mare's eyes fixed on him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. She had stopped struggling, as if she understood that this two-legged creature might be her only hope for survival. Cole moved slowly, talking to her in the same gentle voice he used with Snowdrift, explaining what he was going to do even though he knew she couldn't understand his words. Animals responded to tone and intention, and he poured all his compassion and reassurance into his voice as he worked. His wire cutters were in his saddlebag, and he retrieved them carefully, aware that one wrong move could spook the mare into a final, fatal struggle. The barbed wire had bitten deep, and blood had frozen in dark patches on her chestnut coat. Some of these wounds would require treatment beyond what he could provide here in the wilderness, and he found himself wondering if the mare would even survive the injuries, let alone the stress of being handled by humans for the first time in her life. It took 20 minutes of careful work to free her from the wire. Cole's fingers grew numb despite his gloves, and more than once he had to stop and warm his hands inside his coat before continuing. The mare stood trembling but patient, as if she had made some decision to trust this stranger who smelled of wood smoke and leather and spoke with such kindness. When the last strand of wire fell away, Cole stepped back, expecting her to bolt into the forest. Instead, the mare took 3 limping steps toward him and stopped, her dark eyes fixed on his face. She nickered softly, a sound of pain, and something else, something that might have been gratitude, or simply recognition of a fellow creature who understood suffering. Then she turned and began walking slowly and deliberately, away from the direction Cole had come, deeper into the wilderness where the storm was gathering its strength. Cole watched her go, torn between the need to return to his ranch before the weather turned deadly, and a growing curiosity about where this injured wild horse was heading with such apparent purpose. Every instinct told him to mount Snowdrift and ride for home. But something in the mare's behavior, the way she kept stopping to look back at him, seemed almost like an invitation or a plea. She wanted him to follow. And Cole Whitaker, who had spent 4 decades learning to read the language of animals and land, found himself unable to refuse. Cole swung back into the saddle and guided Snowdrift after the injured mare, his decision made despite every reasonable voice in his head screaming that this was foolishness. The chestnut horse moved with painful determination, favoring her wounded leg, but maintaining a steady pace that suggested she had a destination in mind. Her tracks in the snow were easy to follow, marked occasionally by drops of blood that stood out bright crimson against the white landscape. The sight of them made Cole's jaw tighten. Those wounds needed attention soon, or infection would set in. And in this cold, an infection could kill as surely as any predator. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they climbed higher into the mountains. The pine forest gave way to rocky slopes where the snow lay thinner, blown into drifts by the constant wind. Cole could feel Snowdrift's breathing growing labored beneath him, and he knew they couldn't maintain this pace much longer. The storm was moving in faster than he had anticipated. Already the first flakes were beginning to fall, small and hard as grains of sand, the kind of snow that preceded the heavy accumulation that could bury a man in hours. He pulled his hat lower and hunched his shoulders against the wind. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees in the last hour, and his face was beginning to go numb despite the bandana he had pulled up over his nose and mouth. This was madness, following a wild horse into the high country with a blizzard bearing down. He should turn back while he still could, while the trail home was still visible. But the mare kept moving with that same purposeful limp, and she kept looking back to make sure he was still following, and something about her urgency told him that whatever lay ahead was important enough to risk everything for. They rounded a granite outcropping that jutted from the mountainside like the prow of a ship, and suddenly the landscape opened up into a small valley that Cole had never seen before despite his lifetime of exploring these mountains. It was sheltered on three sides by steep rock walls, with a frozen creek running through its center and a dense stand of ancient spruce trees clustered at its far end. The valley seemed to exist in its own private world, protected from the worst of the wind, eerily quiet except for the sound of the mare's labored breathing and the soft whisper of falling snow. The chestnut horse stopped at the edge of the valley and turned to look at Cole directly. Her eyes held an expression that seemed to pierce right through him, intelligent and knowing in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Then she turned and limped across the valley floor toward the spruce trees, and Cole followed because by now he was too invested in this strange journey to turn back without knowing where it led. As they approached the trees, Cole saw something that made him rein Snowdrift to an abrupt halt. There was a structure hidden among the spruces, a cabin so weathered and overgrown that it seemed to have grown from the forest itself. Its log walls were gray with age and covered with climbing vines that had died back for winter, leaving skeletal patterns against the wood. The roof sagged in the middle, heavy with accumulated snow, and the single window visible from this angle was dark and empty as a socket in a skull. This was no modern hunting cabin or ranger station. This building was old, decades old at least, perhaps even dating back to the frontier days when prospectors and trappers had roamed these mountains looking for gold and fur. The mare walked straight to the cabin door and stopped, turning once more to look at Cole with those unsettling, intelligent eyes. Then she nickered, a sound that was almost like a summons, and pawed at the snow in front of the door with her injured hoof. Cole dismounted and approached slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle in the scabbard on his saddle. He had no idea what he might find inside this forgotten structure, but the mare's behavior suggested something that needed his attention, something important enough that she had led him miles through dangerous country to find it. The cabin door was partially ajar, its leather hinges rotted through with age. Cole pushed it open carefully, the wood groaning in protest, and stepped across the threshold into darkness that smelled of dust and decay and something else, something that made him pause. Smoke. Not fresh smoke, but the lingering scent of a fire that had burned recently enough to leave its mark in the still air. Someone had been here, and not that long ago. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness, Cole began to make out details of the cabin's interior. There was a stone fireplace against the far wall with the remains of a fire in its hearth, the ashes still holding a hint of warmth when he knelt to touch them. A rough wooden table stood in the center of the single room, and against one wall was a narrow cot covered with moth-eaten blankets. The place had the feel of having been abandoned in haste, with a tin cup still sitting on the table and a coat hanging from a peg near the door. Then he saw the message scratched into the wooden tabletop, carved with something sharp enough to bite deep into the grain. The letters were crude but legible, formed by someone whose hand had been shaking with either cold or fear or both. Help, trapped by snow, headed for Ranger Station. If you find this, tell them to look for Sarah Chen at Timber Creek Pass. Cole's blood ran cold as he read the words. Sarah Chen was a name he recognized from the missing persons reports that had been circulating through the county for the past 2 weeks. She was a wildlife biologist who had been studying wolf populations in the high country when the first big storm of the season had caught her unprepared. Search and rescue had been looking for her for days, but the harsh weather had made aerial searches impossible, and the ground teams had found no trace of her. He examined the message more closely, trying to determine when it had been carved. The edges of the letters were still relatively sharp, not smoothed by time or handling. This message was recent, perhaps only a few days old. And if Sarah Chen had left this cabin heading for the ranger station at Timber Creek Pass, she was in serious trouble. That pass was nearly 15 miles from here, all of it brutal terrain even in good weather. In the middle of winter, with storms rolling through every few days, it would be a death trap. Cole moved quickly now, searching the cabin for any other clues about where Sarah might have gone or what condition she had been in when she left. He found a backpack in the corner, emptied of supplies but bearing a tag with her name on it. Whoever this woman was, she had been desperate enough to abandon her gear and strike out on foot through some of the most dangerous country in Montana. The thought of what she must have faced, alone and inadequately equipped, made his chest tighten with a mixture of admiration and horror. Outside, the mare waited patiently, and when Cole emerged from the cabin, she turned and began limping toward the far end of the valley. He understood now. This incredible animal had somehow known that someone needed help, had understood that the cabin contained a message that needed to be found, and had led him here despite her own injuries. How she had known, or why she had chosen him, were questions that defied rational explanation. But Cole had lived too long in wild country to dismiss the inexplicable when it stared him in the face with the eyes of a wounded horse. The decision Cole faced was impossible. The rational choice was to ride for his ranch as fast as snowdrift could carry him, contact the sheriff's office, and let the professional search and rescue teams handle the search for Sarah Chen. That was the safe choice, the sensible choice, the choice that wouldn't get him killed in the mountains during a blizzard. But the rational choice meant leaving Sarah out there for at least another 12 hours, probably longer given how long it would take search teams to mobilize and reach this remote location, and 12 hours in these conditions could easily be the difference between life and death. Cole looked at the sky, reading the clouds with the practiced eye of a man who had bet his life on weather predictions more times than he cared to count. The main body of the storm was still hours away, maybe 3 or 4 if he was lucky. That gave him a narrow window to attempt a search, but only if he moved fast and didn't get lost in terrain he barely knew. The injured mare was still waiting, still watching him with those knowing eyes, and when he mounted Snowdrift again, she began moving immediately, as if she had never doubted that he would follow. They left the valley through a narrow gap in the rock walls, following what appeared to be an old game trail that wound upward through a series of switchbacks. The mare's pace was slower now, her injured leg clearly causing her significant pain, but her determination never wavered. She would take a dozen limping steps, then stop and look back to ensure Cole was still following, then continue on. It was the behavior of an animal on a mission, driven by something deeper than mere survival instinct. The snow was falling harder now, the flakes no longer small and hard but large and wet, the kind that stuck to everything and accumulated fast. Visibility was dropping, the mountains around them fading into a white haze that made it difficult to judge distances or identify landmarks. Cole knew he was taking a terrible risk, that he could easily become disoriented and lost in conditions like these, but the mare seemed to know exactly where she was going, moving with the confidence of an animal following a familiar path. After 20 minutes of climbing, they emerged onto a high ridge that overlooked a series of interconnected valleys stretching away toward the distant peaks. The wind hit them with brutal force, strong enough to make Snowdrift stagger and lean into it. Cole pulled his coat tighter and scanned the landscape below, looking for any sign of human presence. What he saw made his heart sink. The terrain between here and Timber Creek Pass was even worse than he had feared, a nightmare landscape of steep slopes, dense forest, and rocky canyons where a person could break a leg or get hopelessly lost within minutes. The mare didn't hesitate. She started down the far side of the ridge, picking her way carefully through the rocks and snow. Cole followed, trusting in this animal's inexplicable knowledge, even as his own common sense screamed that he was being a fool. The descent was treacherous, with loose stones hidden beneath the snow and sudden drop-offs that appeared without warning. Twice Snowdrift nearly lost her footing, and Cole had to use all his skill to keep her balanced and moving forward. They reached the valley floor and entered a forest of towering pines, whose branches were so thick they blocked out most of the falling snow. Here the going was easier, though the light was dim and shadows seemed to move at the edge of Cole's vision. The mare led them along a frozen creek bed, her hooves crunching through the ice crust with each painful step. Blood was still seeping from her wounds, leaving a trail of dark spots on the white snow, and Cole found himself worried not just about finding Sarah Chen, but about whether this brave animal would survive her injuries. Then the mare stopped abruptly, her head raised and ears forward, focused on something ahead. Cole reined Snowdrift to a halt and listened intently. At first he heard nothing but the wind in the trees and his own breathing. Then it came, faint but unmistakable, a human voice calling for help. Cole urged Snowdrift forward, following the sound through a tangle of fallen timber and deadwood. The mare was moving faster now despite her pain, her whole body straining toward something Cole couldn't yet see. And then they broke through the trees into a small clearing, and Cole saw her. Sarah Chen was huddled against the base of a massive spruce tree, wrapped in what appeared to be an emergency blanket that was torn and inadequate against the cold. Her face was pale as death itself, her lips blue with hypothermia, and when she looked up at Cole with eyes that barely seemed to register his presence, he knew she was in the final stages of exposure. He was off Snowdrift and kneeling beside her in seconds, his training from years of ranch work and wilderness survival kicking in automatically. She was conscious but barely responsive, her body shivering so violently that her teeth chattered when she tried to speak. Her hands and feet were likely frostbitten, and she had clearly been without adequate food and water for days. How she had survived this long was a testament to either extraordinary luck or sheer stubborn willpower. Cole stripped off his sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, then pulled the emergency blanket from his saddlebag to add another layer. He had a thermos of coffee in his pack, still warm from this morning, and he held it to her lips, forcing her to take small sips despite her protests. The warmth seemed to bring a bit of focus back to her eyes, and she looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "You found the message," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "At the cabin. I didn't think anyone would come." "Found it and followed your trail," Cole replied, though that wasn't exactly true. It had been the mare who had done the real finding, the real tracking. "How long have you been out here?" 3 days since I left the cabin." She was shivering so hard she could barely form the words. "Got turned around in the storm. Couldn't find the pass. Thought I was going to die out here." "You're not going to die," Cole said with more confidence than he felt. "But we need to get you warm and moving. Can you stand?" She tried and failed, her legs too weak to support her weight. Cole caught her as she fell and eased her back against the tree. This was worse than he had thought. She couldn't walk, which meant he would have to carry her. And carrying a full-grown woman through miles of mountain wilderness in the middle of a blizzard was a challenge that might prove impossible even for someone with his strength and experience. The injured mare had moved closer and was standing just a few feet away, watching the scene with those intelligent eyes. As Cole looked at her, trying to figure out how to solve this impossible problem, an idea began to form in his mind. It was crazy, probably doomed to failure, but it was the only chance they had. The mare had led him here, had understood somehow that Sarah needed help. Maybe, just maybe, she would understand what he needed from her now. Cole approached the mare slowly, speaking in the same gentle voice he had used when freeing her from the wire trap. "Easy, girl," he said. "I need your help one more time. I need you to trust me and let this woman ride on your back. Just for a while. Just until we can get her somewhere safe." The mare's ears flicked forward and back, processing his words, or perhaps just the tone of his voice. She was wild, had probably never felt the weight of a rider in her entire life. But she was also intelligent and brave, and she had already proven herself capable of understanding things that should have been beyond an animal's comprehension. Cole moved to Sarah and carefully lifted her to her feet, supporting her full weight as her legs threatened to buckle. He guided her toward the mare, half carrying her across the clearing. The chestnut horse watched them approach but didn't bolt or shy away. When they were close enough, Cole spoke again, his voice calm and reassuring. "This is Sarah. She needs to ride. You understand that, don't you, girl? You brought me here to save her, and this is how we do it." For a long moment, nothing happened. The mare stood perfectly still, her dark eyes moving from Cole to Sarah and back again. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost human in its deliberation, she lowered her head and took a single step closer. Cole felt something catch in his throat. This magnificent creature, injured and in pain, was choosing to help a stranger, choosing to overcome every wild instinct in order to save a human life. Getting Sarah onto the mare's back was a delicate operation that required all of Cole's strength and patience. The wildlife biologist was barely conscious, her body limp and unresponsive as he lifted her. The mare stood steady, though Cole could see the tension in every line of her body, the way her muscles quivered with the effort of staying still when every instinct must have been screaming at her to flee from this unprecedented contact. He spoke to her constantly, murmuring reassurance and gratitude as he carefully positioned Sarah across her back, belly down like a sack of grain. It wasn't dignified, but dignity mattered less than survival right now. Sarah moaned softly as Cole arranged her, and the mare's ears flicked back at the sound. But she didn't move. Cole used his belt and a length of rope from his saddlebag to secure Sarah in place, working quickly but carefully to make sure she wouldn't slide off during the journey ahead. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at the unlikely pair, the injured wild horse and the dying woman, both depending on him to get them to safety before the storm killed them all. The return journey was a nightmare of cold and fear and desperate determination. Cole led both horses, the mare with Sarah draped across her back and Snowdrift carrying his supplies, through terrain that grew increasingly treacherous as the storm intensified. The wind was a living thing now, howling through the trees and driving snow into his face with stinging force. Visibility had dropped to less than 20 feet, and he had to rely on his knowledge of the mountains and sheer luck to find the right path back toward the valley where they had found the cabin. The mare limped beside him with painful slowness, her wounded leg leaving a trail of blood in the snow, but she never faltered, never tried to bolt or shake off her burden. Cole found himself talking to her constantly, telling her she was brave, telling her they were going to make it, telling her that he would take care of her wounds once they reached shelter. Whether she understood his words or simply responded to his tone, he couldn't say. But she seemed to draw strength from his voice, keeping pace with him through conditions that would have defeated lesser animals. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out in pain or confusion, sometimes so still and quiet that Cole had to check to make sure she was still breathing. Each time he verified that weak pulse in her neck, he felt a surge of relief mixed with renewed determination. She had survived 3 days alone in these mountains. He would not let her die now, not when rescue was so close. It was so. Time lost all meaning in the white chaos of the blizzard. Cole couldn't tell if they had been traveling for 1 hour or 3. His face was numb. His fingers had long since lost feeling despite his gloves, and his legs felt like lead weights that required tremendous effort to move. But he kept going, one foot in front of the other, leading the horses through the storm because stopping meant death for all of them. When they finally stumbled back into the sheltered valley where the cabin stood, Cole felt such overwhelming relief that his legs nearly buckled. The ancient structure looked like paradise now, a promise of warmth and shelter from the killing wind. He got both horses into the lean-to that served as a stable, then carefully lifted Sarah from the mare's back and carried her into the cabin. She was barely breathing, her skin so cold it felt like touching ice, and Cole knew he was in a race against time to save her life. He laid her on the narrow cot and immediately set about building a fire in the stone fireplace. The old chimney still worked, and within minutes he had flames crackling, throwing blessed heat into the frigid air. Then he turned his attention to Sarah, stripping off her wet clothing with clinical efficiency and wrapping her in every blanket and piece of fabric he could find in the cabin. She needed external heat to raise her core temperature, needed it desperately and immediately, or she would slip into the final stages of hypothermia from which there was no return. Cole made the decision without hesitation. He stripped off his own wet outer layers and climbed under the blankets with Sarah, using his body heat to warm her frozen flesh. It was the standard treatment for severe hypothermia when no other heat source was available, skin-to-skin contact to transfer warmth from one body to another. He held her close, rubbing her arms and legs to encourage circulation, breathing warm air against her neck and face, willing his own heat to flow into her dying body. For what felt like hours, nothing changed. She remained terrifyingly still and cold, and Cole began to fear that he had found her too late, that the mountains had already claimed her life even though her heart still beat. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he felt her begin to warm. The violent shivering started first, her body's desperate attempt to generate heat, and Cole held her through it, murmuring encouragement as she shook so hard her teeth rattled. Outside the cabin, the blizzard reached its full fury, wind shrieking around the structure and piling snow against the walls. But inside, the fire burned steady and warm, and gradually, Sarah's color began to return. Her breathing deepened, becoming more regular, and when her eyes finally opened and focused on Cole's face, he felt a rush of emotion so intense it surprised him. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and confused. "Safe," he replied. "You're safe. The cabin. How did you find me?" "A horse led me to you. A wild mare. She found your message and somehow knew you needed help." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her cheeks. "The chestnut. I saw her in the forest yesterday, or maybe it was 2 days ago. I don't know anymore. She was caught in a trap. I tried to help her, tried to cut her free, but I didn't have the right tools. I thought she would die there." Understanding crashed over Cole like a wave. That was how the mare had known about Sarah, why she had led him on this desperate journey through the mountains. Sarah had tried to save her, had shown her kindness and compassion even while struggling to survive herself. And the mare, with that inexplicable animal intelligence, had somehow understood that debt and had repaid it by leading a rescuer to the woman who had tried to help her. "You did help her," Cole said quietly. "You showed her that humans could be kind, that we could be trusted. When I found her caught in that wire, she let me approach her, let me free her. And then she led me straight to your cabin, straight to you. I've worked with horses my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it." Sarah's hand found his beneath the blankets, her fingers still cold but growing warmer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for following her, for believing, for saving my life." Cole squeezed her hand gently. "Thank the mare. She's the real hero of this story." They lay together in the firelight as the storm raged outside, and Cole told Sarah everything that had happened, from finding the mare in the trap, to discovering the message in the cabin, to the desperate race to find her before the blizzard made it impossible. Sarah listened with growing wonder, occasionally asking questions, her scientific mind trying to make sense of animal behavior that defied rational explanation. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I study wolves. I've spent years observing animal intelligence and social behavior. I've seen things that most people wouldn't believe, acts of cooperation and communication that go beyond what we think animals are capable of. But what that mare did, it's extraordinary. It's like she understood not just that I needed help, but that you were someone who could provide it. Cole thought about the mare's eyes, the way she had looked at him with such knowing intelligence. Maybe some things aren't meant to be fully understood, he said. Maybe some acts of courage and compassion exist beyond our ability to explain them. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault on the mountains, but inside this ancient shelter, 2 humans and 2 horses waited for the storm to pass, bound together by an inexplicable chain of events that had saved 2 lives and revealed something profound about the capacity for kindness that exists in all creatures, wild or tame. When Sarah was warm enough to sit up and drink the hot coffee Cole had prepared, he left her wrapped in blankets by the fire and went to check on the horses in the lean-to. The structure was old and drafty, but it provided some protection from the wind, and both animals had found positions that offered the most shelter. Snowdrift greeted him with a soft nicker, her calm presence a steadying force as always. But it was the injured mare that drew his immediate attention. She was standing in the far corner, her wounded leg held off the ground, and even in the dim light Cole could see that the injuries were worse than he had initially thought. He approached her slowly, speaking in that same gentle voice that had become their language. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "Let me take a look at that leg. I know it hurts, but we need to clean those wounds before infection sets in." The mare's ears flicked toward him, and though her body tensed as he drew near, she didn't bolt or strike out. Instead, she lowered her head slightly, almost as if granting permission, and Cole felt that same catch in his throat that he had experienced earlier. This animal's trust was a gift beyond price, earned through action rather than words, through kindness shown in moments of desperation. He had medical supplies in his saddlebag, items he always carried when riding in the backcountry, antiseptic bandages and a bottle of veterinary antibiotic powder that he kept for treating injured livestock. The wounds from the barbed wire were deep, cutting through hide and into muscle in several places, and when he began cleaning them with snow melted over the fire, the mare trembled but stood still. Blood and dirt came away under his careful ministrations, revealing the full extent of the damage. These injuries would take weeks to heal properly, and that was assuming they didn't become infected first. As he worked, Cole found himself talking to the mare, telling her about his ranch and the life she could have there if she chose to stay. "I've got good pasture," he said, wrapping clean bandages around her leg with practiced hands. "Shelter from the storms and grain when the grass runs thin. I don't know if you'd want that kind of life, being wild and free as you are. But the offer stands. You saved 2 lives today, and that deserves more than just patching you up and sending you back out there." The mare turned her head to look at him with one dark eye, and Cole could have sworn he saw understanding there, perhaps even consideration. When he finished treating her wounds, he gave both horses the grain he had been carrying for Snowdrift, splitting it between them. The mare ate hungrily, and Cole took that as a good sign. Animals that were giving up on life usually refused food. This one was still fighting, still choosing survival, and he intended to honor that choice by doing everything in his power to ensure she made it. Back in the cabin, Sarah had managed to dress herself in the dry clothes from Cole's emergency pack. They were far too large for her, but they were warm, and that was all that mattered. She sat cross-legged by the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, and when Cole entered, she looked up with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and concern. "How is she?" Sarah asked. "The mare." Cole settled onto a rough wooden stool near the fire and stretched his cold hands toward the flames. "Hurt worse than I'd like," he admitted. "Deep lacerations from the barbed wire, and she's been bleeding for hours. I've cleaned and bandaged the wounds, given her antibiotics, but the next few days will tell the tale. If infection sets in, Cole didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what happened to horses with infected leg wounds in the wilderness. Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "That trap," she said finally, her voice hard with anger. "It wasn't meant for horses. It was meant for wolves. There's been a problem with illegal trapping in this area for months. Some ranchers and hunters who don't like the wolf reintroduction program have been setting snares on public land, trying to take matters into their own hands. I've been documenting it as part of my research, but I never thought I'd see a horse caught in one of those things." Cole's jaw tightened. Setting traps on federal land was a crime, but more than that, it was a betrayal of the unwritten code that governed life in the backcountry. These mountains were harsh enough, without humans adding deliberate cruelty to the natural dangers. "Did you get any evidence?" he asked. "Locations, photos, anything that could help identify who's responsible?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Everything's in my research notes back at base camp. GPS coordinates for every trap site I found, photos, even some game camera footage that might have caught whoever was setting them. But that data doesn't matter much if I don't survive to report it." Her voice wavered slightly on the last words, and Cole saw her hands shake as she raised the coffee cup to her lips. "You're going to survive," Cole said with quiet certainty. "The storm will blow itself out by morning, and then we'll figure out how to get you down to where search and rescue can reach us. Sarah, you made it through 3 days alone in conditions that would have killed most people. Don't give up now when we're so close to getting you home." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "Who are you?" she asked. "I mean, I know you're the man who saved my life, but I don't even know your name." "Cole Whitaker," he replied. "I run cattle on a ranch about 15 miles south of here. Was out looking for some strays when I found your mare in that trap." "My mare," Sarah repeated with a soft laugh. "I suppose she is now, isn't she? Or maybe I'm hers. Hard to say after what she did." She paused, then asked, "You said you run cattle, so you know what it's like when predators threaten your livestock. Do you hate the wolves too?" It was a loaded question, and Cole recognized it for what it was. A test of his character. A way for Sarah to understand what kind of man had saved her life. He thought carefully before answering. "I've lost stock to wolves," he said slowly. "Probably a dozen head over the years. Each one hurt, both financially and personally, because I care about every animal on my ranch. But no, I don't hate wolves. They're just doing what wolves do, trying to survive and feed their families. This country was theirs long before it was ours." He stood and added another log to the fire, watching the sparks spiral up toward the chimney. "The people setting those traps, they're not trying to protect their livestock. If that was their goal, there are legal ways to do it. They're acting out of fear and anger, trying to erase something that reminds them the world is bigger than their control. But you can't solve problems by causing more suffering. That mare out there proved that today. She could have left you to die after you tried to help her. Instead, she sought out help for you despite her own pain. Animals understand something we humans keep forgetting." "What's that?" Sarah asked quietly. "That kindness creates more kindness. That the world doesn't have to be about who's strongest or most ruthless. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is care about someone other than yourself." The words hung in the air between them, and Cole felt suddenly self-conscious, as if he had revealed too much of himself to this stranger. But Sarah was nodding, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My colleagues think I'm crazy," she said. "Spending months alone in the wilderness studying wolves, trying to prove that they're not the monsters people make them out to be. Sometimes I wonder if they're right, if I'm wasting my time trying to change minds that are already made up. But then something like today happens, and I remember why it matters." She set down her coffee cup and pulled the blankets tighter around her shoulders. That mare saved my life because I showed her a moment of compassion. If she can understand that connection, that basic truth about kindness and reciprocity, then surely humans can too. Maybe the data I've collected will make a difference. Maybe showing people the truth about wolves will change a few minds, prevent a few more illegal traps from being set. Cole returned to his seat and met her eyes across the firelight. "Your data will make a difference," he said, "but not if you don't live to share it. So tomorrow, when this storm clears, we focus on getting you home safe. Everything else can wait." Outside, the wind continued to howl and the snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, a different kind of warmth was growing. Two strangers brought together by extraordinary circumstances were finding common ground, building a fragile connection based on shared values and mutual respect. And in the lean-to, an injured wild mare stood watch over them all, her presence a living reminder that courage and compassion could exist in the most unexpected places. The night deepened around the cabin, and with it came the bone-chilling cold that made even the crackling fire seem inadequate against the winter's assault. Cole kept the flames fed with wood he found stacked against the cabin's interior wall, grateful that whoever had last used this shelter had left behind enough fuel to see them through the storm. Sarah had drifted into an exhausted sleep, her body finally surrendering to the toll of 3 days fighting for survival in the wilderness. Cole watched her sleep and marveled at the strength it must have taken for her to endure what she had endured. Around midnight, by his estimation, the mare's distressed whinny cut through the wind's howl. Cole was on his feet instantly, pulling on his coat and grabbing the lantern before heading into the freezing darkness of the lean-to. The temperature had dropped even further, and his breath formed thick clouds in the lamplight as he approached the mare. She was lying down now, something that worried him immediately. Horses typically only lay down when they were very sick or dying, and seeing this brave animal on her side sent fear shooting through his chest. He knelt beside her and placed a hand on her neck. Her coat was wet with sweat despite the cold, and when he examined her wounded leg by lantern light, he saw what he had feared. The bandages were soaked through with blood and other fluids, and the flesh around the wounds was hot and swollen. Infection had set in despite his treatment, and it was spreading fast. The mare's breathing was labored, her eyes glazed with pain and fever, and Cole knew with sickening certainty that she was dying. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not like this. Not after everything you've done." He checked his medical supplies, knowing even as he did so that what he had wouldn't be enough. The mare needed antibiotics stronger than the powder he had used earlier, needed professional veterinary care and time to heal in a warm, clean environment. None of those things were available here in this remote cabin with a blizzard raging outside. Cole made a decision born of desperation and determination. He couldn't save the mare here, but he could keep her comfortable and fighting until the storm cleared and he could get help. He gathered every blanket and piece of fabric he could spare from the cabin and carefully covered the mare's body, creating layers of insulation against the killing cold. Then he positioned himself beside her, adding his own body heat to the equation, and began the long vigil through the night. He talked to her constantly, his voice a steady stream of encouragement and comfort in the darkness. "You saved Sarah's life," he said, stroking her neck with gentle hands. "You led me through the storm when any other horse would have given up. You're the bravest creature I've ever known, and I'll be damned if I let you die in this lean-to without a fight." The mare's ear flicked toward his voice, and he took that as a sign that some part of her was still present, still listening, still choosing to hang on. Sarah found them there an hour later, having woken to find Cole gone and following the lantern light through the storm. She stood in the entrance to the lean-to, wrapped in blankets, and took in the scene with eyes that quickly filled with tears. "She's dying," Cole said without looking up. "Infection's too far advanced. I don't have what I need to save her." "What?" Sarah moved closer and knelt on the mare's other side, her hands joining Cole's in offering what comfort they could. "We have to try something," she said. her voice fierce despite the tears streaming down her face. "After what she did for us, we can't just let her go without trying everything." "I've done everything I know how to do," Cole replied, and there was defeat in his voice that he hated hearing. "I'm a rancher, not a veterinarian. I can handle minor injuries and basic care, but this is beyond my skill. She needs real medical attention, and there's no way to get it to her in these conditions." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "I have something in my emergency pack." It was in the cabin, hidden under the cot. I didn't mention it before because I was saving it for absolute emergencies. She paused, meeting Cole's eyes across the mare's body. "I have a satellite phone. It's for calling in emergency extractions when I'm doing field work in remote areas. If we can get a signal, we might be able to reach someone who can help." Hope surged in Cole's chest, painful in its intensity. "Go get it," he said. "Try now. We don't have time to wait." Sarah ran back to the cabin and returned minutes later with a ruggedized satellite phone. Her hands shook as she powered it on and waited for it to acquire a signal. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity, while Cole continued his vigil beside the dying mare. Then Sarah's face lit up with the glow of the screen. "I've got a signal," she said. "Who should I call?" "There's a veterinarian in Silver Creek," Cole said quickly. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. She does large animal work and she knows these mountains. If anyone can help us, it's her. But I don't know if she'll be able to reach us in this storm." Sarah was already dialing, having pulled the number from Emergency Services Directory. The conversation that followed was terse and urgent, Sarah explaining the situation while Cole listened with half his attention, the other half focused on the mare's increasingly labored breathing. When Sarah ended the call, her expression was a mixture of hope and worry. "Dr. Morrison says there's a ranger station about 5 miles from here with a snowcat," she said. "She's going to try to reach the rangers and convince them to bring her up here, but it could take hours, maybe longer depending on the conditions." "Cole, she doesn't know if the mare will last that long. Then we keep her alive until help arrives," Cole said with grim determination. "We keep her warm, keep her comfortable, and we don't let her give up." He looked down at the mare, this magnificent creature who had defied every instinct to save a stranger's life, and made a silent promise. "I won't abandon you," he said softly. "You didn't abandon Sarah, and I won't abandon you." The hours that followed tested every ounce of Cole's endurance and resolve. He and Sarah worked in shifts, one always beside the mare, providing warmth and comfort, while the other tended the fire and prepared hot water bottles to place against the mare's body. They cleaned her wounds repeatedly, though it seemed to make little difference against the relentless spread of infection. They offered her water, which she occasionally accepted, and spoke to her constantly, willing her to keep fighting. Around 3 in the morning, the mare's condition worsened dramatically. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, her eyes rolled back, and she began to tremble uncontrollably. Cole felt panic rising in his throat. "She's going into shock," he said to Sarah. "This is it. This is where we lose her." But Sarah grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No," she said fiercely. "We don't give up. Not now. Not ever." She positioned herself at the mare's head and began speaking directly into her ear, her voice rising above the wind. "Listen to me," she said. "I know you're tired. I know you want to let go. I felt that way too when I was out there alone in the cold, thinking I was going to die. But you didn't let me give up, did you? You fought through your own pain to save my life. So now it's my turn. Now I'm fighting for you, and you're going to live, because that's what survivors do. We survive." The mare's eye focused on Sarah's face, and something passed between woman and animal, some wordless understanding that transcended the barrier of species. The trembling slowed, then stopped. The breathing, while still labored, became more regular, and Cole, watching this impossible moment unfold, felt something shift in his understanding of what was possible when compassion and determination combined forces against impossible odds. They held vigil through the darkest hours of the night, two humans and one horse bound together in a shared struggle against death itself. And when the first gray light of dawn finally began to seep through the storm clouds, when they heard the distant rumble of an engine fighting its way through the snow, Cole allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to win this fight after all. The snowcat emerged from the pre-dawn gloom like something out of a dream, its powerful engine rumbling as it plowed through drifts that would have stopped any conventional vehicle. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison climbed out before the machine had fully stopped, her medical bag already in hand, and her expression set with the focused determination of a professional facing a critical emergency. She was a woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen every kind of animal emergency the Montana wilderness could produce. She took one look at the mare and immediately began issuing orders. "Cole, I need hot water and clean towels. Sarah, help me get proper light in here so I can see what I'm working with. And both of you need to understand that this animal is in critical condition. I'm going to do everything I can, but you need to prepare yourselves for the possibility that we might lose her." The next hour was a blur of frantic activity as Dr. Morrison worked with the efficient precision of someone who had performed emergency procedures in far worse conditions than a drafty lean-to during a blizzard. She started an IV line to deliver fluids and powerful antibiotics directly into the mare's bloodstream, then set about debriding the infected wounds with a skill that made Cole grateful he had called for professional help. The mare barely reacted to the painful procedures, too weak to do more than occasionally flick an ear or shift her weight slightly. "This is bad, Doctor," Morrison said as she worked, not sugarcoating the situation. "The infection has spread into the deeper tissue and possibly into the bone. If we were at my clinic, I'd say she had maybe a 30% chance of pulling through. Out here, with limited equipment in these conditions, I'd put it closer to 10%. She paused and looked up at Cole and Sarah. "But that 10% exists because this mare has already proven she's a fighter. I've seen animals with less severe injuries give up and die, and I've seen animals with worse injuries somehow pull through on sheer willpower alone." Cole knelt beside the mare's head and stroked her neck gently. "She's already fought through more than most horses could handle," he said quietly. "She led me through a blizzard to save Sarah's life despite being injured and in pain. If any animal has the will to survive, it's this one." "Doctor." Morrison nodded and returned to her work, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she cleaned, sutured, and dressed the wounds. When she finally sat back on her heels and surveyed her work, her expression was cautiously optimistic. "I've done all I can for now," she said. "The antibiotics should start working within a few hours if they're going to work at all. The next 24 hours will tell us whether she's going to make it. We need to keep her warm, keep her hydrated, and watch for any signs of deterioration." The ranger who had driven the snowcat, a young man named Tom Bradley, had been unloading supplies from the vehicle. He approached with thermal blankets and a portable heater that ran off the snowcat's generator. "We can set this up to keep the temperature stable in here," he said. "And I've got emergency rations for you folks. Search and Rescue has been looking for Dr. Chen for days. Command is going to be mighty relieved to hear we found her alive." Sarah, who had been silent during Dr. Morrison's treatment of the mare, finally spoke up. "How long before we can get out of here?" she asked. "I need to get my research data back to base before anyone tries to interfere with the trap sites." Tom checked his radio and frowned at the response he received. "The main storm has passed, but we've got another system moving in behind it. Roads are impassable, and even with the snowcat, it's going to be slow going. I'd say we're looking at maybe 12 hours before we can get you down to civilization, possibly longer if conditions worsen." Cole felt torn between relief and frustration. Relief that Sarah was safe and that help had arrived for the mare, but frustrated by the delay in getting both of them proper medical attention. Sarah still needed to be checked for frostbite and other complications from her ordeal, and the mare's condition remained critical despite Dr. Morrison's skilled intervention. The veterinarian seemed to read his thoughts. Sarah needs rest and observation, but she's stable, Dr. Morrison said, and the mare can't be moved anyway, not for days at minimum. The best thing we can do is make everyone comfortable and wait for conditions to improve. She turned to Cole with a shrewd look. You've done good work here, Cole Whitaker. Most ranchers would have left a wild horse to its fate and focused on getting the human to safety. The fact that you risked everything to save both of them says something about your character. Cole felt his face grow warm at the praise. The mare deserved to be saved, he said simply. She's extraordinary. What she did for Sarah, leading me to her despite her own injuries, I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of working with horses. Dr. Morrison moved to the mare and examined her eyes and gums with a small flashlight. I've been a veterinarian for 30 years, she said quietly, and I've learned that animals are capable of far more than we give them credit for. Intelligence, emotion, even what might be called morality in some cases. This mare's actions don't surprise me as much as they humble me. She reminds us that consciousness and compassion aren't uniquely human traits. As the day wore on, they settled into a routine of care and waiting. Dr. Morrison monitored the mare's vital signs every hour, adjusting medications and fluids as needed. Cole and Sarah took turns sitting with the mare, talking to her, encouraging her to keep fighting. Tom Bradley maintained the heater and kept everyone supplied with hot food and coffee from the emergency rations. The cabin became a small island of warmth and hope in the frozen wilderness. Around midday, Sarah pulled Cole aside while Dr. Morrison was examining the mare. I've been thinking, she said, her voice low and serious. When we get out of here, when I turn over my research data about the illegal trapping, there's going to be an investigation. People are going to be angry, possibly dangerous. The kind of people who set those traps aren't going to take kindly to being exposed. Cole had been thinking along similar lines. You'll need protection, he said. Someone to watch your back until the authorities can make arrests. I know the ranching community around here. Most are good people, but there are always a few who think laws don't apply to them when it comes to protecting what they see as their territory. Sarah met his eyes, and he saw both fear and determination there. I'm not backing down from this, she said. That mare almost died because someone set an illegal trap. How many other animals have suffered or died in those snares? How many wolves, the very animals I'm supposed to be studying and protecting, have been killed by people who think they're above the law? You shouldn't back down, Cole agreed, but you shouldn't face it alone either. When we get back to civilization, I'm going to make some calls. There are ranchers I trust, good people who believe in doing things the right way. We'll make sure you have support when you turn over that evidence. They were interrupted by an excited sound from Dr. Morrison. She's rallying, the veterinarian called out. Temperature is coming down, heart rate is stabilizing, the antibiotics are working. Cole and Sarah rushed to the mare's side and saw what Dr. Morrison had seen. The mare's eyes were clearer, more focused, and she was holding her head up slightly, showing more awareness of her surroundings than she had since the infection had worsened. Cole felt emotion swell in his chest as he stroked the mare's face. That's it, girl, he murmured. You keep fighting. You're going to make it through this. The mare's dark eye fixed on his face, and she made a soft sound, not quite a nicker, but close, and Cole chose to interpret it as agreement. Dr. Morrison checked her watch and made notes in a small journal. If she continues to improve at this rate, she might just beat the odds, she said. But we're not out of the woods yet. Infection can rally even after appearing to retreat. We need to maintain vigilance for at least another 12 hours before I'll feel confident about her chances. As afternoon faded toward evening, they received word over the radio that the second storm system had changed course and was passing north of their position. The roads were being cleared, and a proper rescue operation would reach them by morning. Sarah would be evacuated to a hospital for a full medical evaluation, and arrangements were being made to transport the mare to Dr. Morrison's clinic as soon as she was stable enough to travel. That night, with the worst of the danger behind them, Cole found himself sitting beside the mare with Sarah on the other side, both of them wrapped in thermal blankets, both unwilling to leave the animal who had brought them together in such extraordinary circumstances. "You know," Sarah said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "when I decided to study wolves in Montana, I thought I understood what I was getting into. I thought I knew about the conflict between conservation and tradition, between wild nature and human civilization. But this experience has taught me something I never learned in all my years of academic study." "What's that?" Cole asked. "That the best of both worlds exists in people like you," she replied. "People who understand that we can honor tradition and protect the wild at the same time, that we don't have to choose between respecting the land's history and preserving its future." The mare whinnied softly as if in agreement, and both humans smiled at her timing. Morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the storm having finally exhausted itself during the night. The world outside the cabin was transformed into a landscape of impossible beauty, every surface covered in pristine white snow that sparkled like diamonds in the rising sun. The mountains stood sharp and clear against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the air was so cold and pure that breathing it felt like drinking from a mountain spring. The rescue team arrived just after dawn, 3 snowcats carrying paramedics, additional search and rescue personnel, and equipment to transport both Sarah and the mare to proper medical facilities. Sarah was examined by the paramedics and declared stable enough to travel, though they insisted she needed a full evaluation at the hospital to check for lasting effects from her exposure and near-death experience. She protested, wanting to stay with the mare until they knew for certain the animal would survive, but Dr. Morrison was firm. "You've done your part," the veterinarian said gently. "Now let the professionals take over. I'll personally oversee the mare's transport to my clinic, and I promise to keep you updated on her condition. But you need proper medical care, Sarah. You survived something that should have killed you, and we need to make sure there's no permanent damage." Sarah finally relented, but not before extracting a promise from Cole. "You'll check on her?" she asked, her eyes pleading. "The mare, I mean. You'll make sure she's being cared for properly, that she's not alone and scared in some strange place." Cole took her hands in his, a gesture that felt surprisingly natural despite how recently they had met. "I'll be at Dr. Morrison's clinic every day until she's well enough to leave," he said. "And when she is, if she wants to stay wild, I'll make sure she has safe territory where no one will trap her again. But if she wants a home, a place where she'll be protected and valued, she'll have one at my ranch for as long as she lives." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, and she pulled Cole into an embrace that spoke of gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing between them through the shared ordeal of the past day and night. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for everything, for saving both our lives, for being the kind of man who risks everything for a wild horse he'd never met before." The paramedics loaded Sarah into one of the snowcats, bundling her in heated blankets and starting an IV to ensure proper hydration during the journey down the mountain. Before the door closed, she looked back at Cole one more time. "Come visit me at the hospital," she called out. "I want to hear how she's doing, and I want to tell you more about my research, about what we can do to stop the people who set those traps." "I'll be there tomorrow," Cole promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. This woman had walked into his life through the most unlikely circumstances imaginable, and something told him she was meant to stay in it, in one form or another. After Sarah's snowcat disappeared down the mountain trail, Cole turned his attention to preparing the mare for transport. Dr. Morrison had determined that she was stable enough to move, but it would require careful handling and constant monitoring during the journey. They had brought a specially designed transport sled that could be towed behind one of the snowcats, with padding and heating elements to keep the mare comfortable during what would be a slow, cautious trip to the clinic. Getting the mare onto the sled proved to be the biggest challenge. She was stronger than she had been the night before, the antibiotics clearly doing their work, but she was still weak and in pain. Cole spoke to her constantly as they worked, explaining what was happening, promising her that this temporary discomfort would lead to healing and safety. The mare seemed to understand, or perhaps she simply trusted him after everything they had been through together. She allowed herself to be guided onto the sled, settled into the padding with only minimal protest, and lay quietly as they secured her for the journey. The trip down the mountain took 3 hours, with Dr. Morrison driving the snowcat at a crawl to minimize jostling. Cole rode in the back of the sled with the mare, monitoring her condition and providing reassurance whenever she grew restless. Tom Bradley followed in a second snowcat, and the convoy moved through the winter landscape like a slow-motion ballet, each movement deliberate and careful. They passed through valleys Cole had never seen before, around rock formations that seemed to glow in the morning light, across frozen streams where ice formed fantastic sculptures on the banks. The mare watched it all with alert eyes, her head raised despite her weakness, and Cole wondered what she was thinking as she saw her wilderness home from this strange new perspective. Was she afraid, curious, resigned to whatever fate awaited her? When they finally reached Dr. Morrison's clinic on the outskirts of Silver Creek, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread about the wild horse who had saved a scientist's life, and people had come to see this remarkable animal for themselves. Cole felt protective as strangers pressed forward wanting to take photos and hear the story, and he positioned himself between the mare and the crowd. "Give her space," he said firmly. "She's been through enough without being treated like a circus attraction." Dr. Morrison backed him up with professional authority, shooing away the gawkers and directing her staff to move the mare into a private stall in the clinic's recovery barn. The stall was spacious and clean, with fresh bedding and a heat lamp to maintain comfortable temperatures. They transferred the mare from the sled with practiced efficiency, and once she was settled, Dr. Morrison conducted another thorough examination. "The wounds look good," she announced after several minutes of careful inspection. "The infection is definitely retreating. If she continues to improve at this rate, I'd say we're looking at a full recovery, though it will take time, weeks, possibly months before those wounds heal completely." Cole felt relief wash over him so powerfully that his knees went weak. "She's going to make it," he said, the words somewhere between a question and a statement. "She's really going to make it." "Barring any unexpected complications, yes," Dr. Morrison replied with a smile. "This mare has proven she's got the constitution to match her courage." She looked at Cole with knowing eyes. "You planning to adopt her once she's well? I can tell you've already bonded with her, and she clearly trusts you. It would be a shame to release her back to the wild where she might end up in another trap or face who knows what other dangers." Cole hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead, too focused on simply keeping the mare alive to consider what would happen afterward. But now, looking at this brave animal who had changed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand, he knew there was only one answer. "If she'll have me," he said quietly. "I'll give her a home where she'll be safe and valued for as long as she lives. But I want her to have a choice. I don't want to force her into captivity if what she wants is freedom." Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's the right approach," she said. "We'll give her time to heal. Let her get used to being around humans in a low-pressure environment and see what she decides. Some wild animals can never truly adjust to domestication, and that's okay. But some discover they prefer the security and comfort of a home to the harsh realities of wilderness survival. We'll let her tell us what she wants." Over the next few days, Cole fell into a routine that centered around the mare's care and recovery. He visited the clinic every morning before dawn, helping Dr. Morrison's staff with feeding and wound care, spending hours simply sitting with the mare and talking to her about everything and nothing. He told her about his ranch, about the life she could have there if she chose it. He told her about Sarah and how her act of courage had brought two strangers together in ways neither could have predicted. And he told her about his own loneliness, the years he had spent focused on work and survival without allowing himself to want more from life. The mare listened to it all with those intelligent eyes, and day by day she grew stronger. The wounds began to close, healthy pink tissue replacing infected flesh. Her appetite returned with a vengeance, and she nickered with pleasure whenever Cole appeared with fresh grain or sweet hay. And most remarkably, she began seeking out human contact, rather than merely tolerating it, nuzzling Cole's shoulder when he entered her stall, following him with her eyes when he moved around the recovery barn. True to his promise, Cole visited Sarah at the hospital every evening after his time with the mare. She was recovering well from her ordeal, though she would carry some permanent scarring from frostbite on 2 of her toes. The doctor said she was lucky to have escaped with such minimal lasting damage, given how close she had come to dying from exposure. Sarah credited her survival to stubbornness and the certainty that someone would find the message she had left in the cabin. On the 4th evening of Sarah's hospital stay, Cole arrived to find her room filled with law enforcement officials. A federal wildlife officer, 2 county deputies, and a representative from the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks were gathered around her bed, examining maps and photographs spread across the blanket. Sarah looked up when Cole entered, and the relief in her eyes was unmistakable. She had been waiting for him, needing his presence and support as she navigated the complex process of reporting the illegal trapping operation. "Cole," she said, gesturing him closer. "I was just explaining to these officers about the trap sites I documented before the storm. I think you should hear this too, since you found the mare caught in one of those snares." The federal officer, a woman named Agent Martinez with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, turned to Cole with interest. "Mr. Whitaker, Dr. Chen has been telling us about the wild horse that led you to her. She says the animal was caught in what appears to be an illegally set wolf snare. Can you describe what you saw?" Cole recounted the details of finding the mare tangled in barbed wire, the deliberate nature of the trap, and the location in federal wilderness where no legal trapping should have been taking place. As he spoke, Agent Martinez made notes and occasionally asked clarifying questions. When he finished, she exchanged glances with the other officers, and something passed between them that suggested this information confirmed suspicions they already held. Dr. Chen's research has uncovered what appears to be a systematic illegal trapping operation spanning multiple counties, Agent Martinez said. "We've had reports of missing wolves from the reintroduction program, unexplained deaths of other wildlife, and complaints from legitimate trappers about competition from unlicensed operators. But until now, we haven't had concrete evidence linking these incidents or identifying who's responsible." Sarah pulled a laptop from her bedside table and opened it to reveal a detailed map marked with GPS coordinates and color-coded pins. "Each pin represents a trap site I found during my fieldwork," she explained. "Red pins are active snares I documented with photographs. Yellow pins are locations where I found evidence of recent trapping activity, like disturbed ground or animal remains. Blue pins are sites where local hunters or hikers reported seeing suspicious activity." The map showed a pattern that made Cole's jaw tighten. The trap sites formed a rough circle around the prime wolf habitat in the mountains, creating a deadly barrier that would prevent the reintroduced wolves from expanding their territory or establishing new pack ranges. This wasn't random poaching or opportunistic trapping. This was a calculated campaign to eliminate the wolf population before it could become self-sustaining. Who would have the resources and knowledge to set up something this extensive? one of the county deputies asked. This looks like it took months of planning and significant investment in equipment and time. Sarah's expression grew troubled. That's the difficult part, she said. Based on my research and conversations with locals, I believe we're looking at a coalition of ranchers who oppose the wolf reintroduction from the beginning. Not all ranchers, she added quickly, glancing at Cole. Most have been willing to work with wildlife management on non-lethal deterrence and compensation programs for livestock losses. But there's a faction that sees the wolves as an existential threat to their way of life. Cole felt anger building in his chest, not at Sarah's assessment, but at the truth it represented. He knew the ranchers she was talking about, had heard their rhetoric at community meetings and seen their influence in local politics. They were men who believed that federal wildlife policies were attacks on their livelihoods, who saw any limitation on their ability to use public lands as government overreach. Some of them were his neighbors, people he had known for years. "Can you prove who's behind it?" he asked quietly. Having a map of trap sites is one thing. Connecting those sites to specific individuals is another. Agent Martinez nodded approvingly at the question. "That's exactly the challenge we face," she said. "Dr. Chen's documentation gives us probable cause to investigate, but we need more. We need to catch someone in the act or find direct evidence linking specific individuals to the traps." Sarah closed her laptop and met Cole's eyes. "That's where you come in," she said. "You know these people, know the ranching community in ways I never could as an outsider. If you were willing to help, to keep your ears open and let us know if you hear anything about the trapping operation, it could make all the difference in building a prosecutable case." The request put Cole in an impossible position. She was asking him to inform on his neighbors, to betray the trust and solidarity that had been part of ranch culture for generations. But she was also asking him to stand up for what was right, to protect animals like the mare who had nearly died in one of those cruel traps, to defend the principle that laws applied to everyone, regardless of their economic interests or personal beliefs. "I'll do it," he said, the words coming out before he had fully thought through their implications. "But I have conditions. I won't wear a wire or pretend to be someone I'm not. I won't entrap anyone or encourage illegal behavior. What I will do is be honest about my support for the wolf program and my opposition to illegal trapping. If that leads to conversations where people incriminate themselves, I'll report what I hear, but I won't lie or manipulate to get that information." Agent Martinez considered his terms for a moment, then nodded. "That's fair, and probably more effective than anything we could orchestrate. People are more likely to speak freely around someone they see as genuinely one of them, even if they disagree on specific issues. Your reputation as an honest rancher who treats his animals well will carry weight in those circles." Over the next hour, they worked out the details of how Cole would report any relevant information he gathered. He would have a direct line to Agent Martinez, and anything he reported would be used only to guide the investigation, not as direct evidence unless he was willing to testify. The legal framework was complex, designed to protect both Cole's safety and the integrity of any eventual prosecution. When the officers finally left, Cole and Sarah were alone in the hospital room for the first time since the rescue. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes speaking to the emotional toll of reliving her ordeal and committing to a course of action that would likely make her unpopular in the community she studied. Cole pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin and the strength in her grip. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked gently. "Going after these people, exposing the trapping operation, it's going to make you a target. There will be threats, possibly even violence. You could walk away, let the authorities handle it without your direct involvement." Sarah shook her head firmly. "That mare almost died trying to save my life," she said. "The least I can do is try to stop the people who nearly killed her. Besides, this is bigger than one horse or even one wolf pack. This is about whether we as a society can make room for wildness whether we can share the land with creatures who were here long before us. If I back down from this fight, I'm betraying everything I believe in." Cole understood that conviction because he felt it too. The mayor had changed something in him, opened his eyes to possibilities and responsibilities he had been too busy or too comfortable to see before. He thought about her in her stall at Dr. Morrison's clinic, growing stronger each day, learning to trust humans despite every reason wild animals had to fear them. That trust was a gift that demanded reciprocation. "I saw her take her first steps today," he said, changing the subject to something lighter. "The mare, I mean." Dr. Morrison took off the bandages for the first time, and she walked the full length of her stall without limping. "The wounds are healing better than anyone expected." Sarah's face lit up with joy. "That's wonderful," she said. "When can I see her?" "The doctors say I'm being discharged tomorrow, and the first thing I want to do is visit that brave animal." "I'll pick you up," Cole offered. "Drive you to the clinic myself. Dr. Morrison says the mare asks for me every morning by nickering whenever she hears my truck, but I think she'll be just as happy to see you. You're the one she saved after all." They talked for another hour about plans and possibilities. Sarah would need a place to stay while she continued her wolf research, and Cole found himself offering one of the guest rooms at his ranch house before he had fully thought through the implications. Sarah accepted with a smile that made his heart skip, and they both understood that something was shifting between them, moving beyond gratitude and shared trauma into territory neither had anticipated. When Cole finally left the hospital and drove through the dark Montana night toward his ranch, he thought about the chain of events that had led him to this moment. A wild horse caught in a trap, a desperate woman leaving a message in an abandoned cabin, a blizzard that should have killed them both, but instead had brought them together. None of it made sense according to the rational rules that govern most of life. But then, the most important things rarely did. 3 weeks later, Cole stood at the fence of his largest pasture, watching the chestnut mare explore her new surroundings with cautious curiosity. Dr. Morrison had declared her fully healed the week before, the wounds reduced to pink scars that would fade with time, and the decision had been made to bring her to the Whitaker Ranch for what they were calling a trial period. The mare would have the freedom to roam the pasture, interact with Snowdrift and Cole's other horses, and, most importantly, make her own choice about whether she wanted to stay or return to the wilderness. Sarah stood beside him at the fence, her hand resting comfortably on his arm, in a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. She had moved into the guest room at his ranch house, ostensibly to continue her wolf research from a more secure base of operations, but both of them knew the arrangement had evolved into something more significant than professional convenience. They had fallen into an easy domestic rhythm, sharing meals and conversation, working side by side on ranch tasks and research projects, discovering in each other a partnership that felt as inevitable as it was unexpected. The mare approached the fence where they stood, her movements fluid and confident, now that pain no longer governed her gait. She had filled out during her recovery, her coat gleaming with health, and there was a brightness in her eyes that spoke of a spirit unbroken by her ordeal. She stopped just out of reach and regarded them with that same intelligent gaze that had first captured Cole's attention in the snowy wilderness. "What do you think she'll choose?" Sarah asked quietly. "Will she stay, or will she leave when we open that gate?" Cole had been asking himself the same question for days. The mare was fully wild, had spent her entire life in the mountains before the trap had changed everything. Logic suggested she would bolt for freedom the moment she had the opportunity, would return to the life she had always known despite the dangers it held. But there was something in the way she looked at them, something in how she sought out their company. Even when she had the whole pasture to herself, that suggested a different possibility. "I think she's already chosen," he said. "Look at how she watches us, how she comes when I call her name. She's been making her choice every day since we brought her here, bit by bit learning to trust that this place is safe and that we mean her no harm." Cole had started calling the mare Aurora after the northern lights that had danced across the sky the night she had led him to Sarah. The name seemed to fit her luminous spirit and the way she had illuminated the path when everything else was darkness. Sarah smiled and reached into her pocket, pulling out an apple she had brought from the kitchen. She held it out on her flat palm, an offering of friendship and gratitude. Aurora hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and accepting the treat with surprising gentleness, her soft lips brushing Sarah's hand. The simple act of trust made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "After everything we put her through," she said softly, "all the pain and fear and confusion of being trapped and treated and transported, she still chooses kindness over caution." The investigation into the illegal trapping operation had been moving forward with careful deliberation. Cole had kept his promise to Agent Martinez, listening carefully during community meetings and casual conversations, reporting anything that seemed relevant without compromising his integrity or relationships. The information he provided had helped federal agents identify 3 primary suspects, all ranchers with known opposition to the Wolf program and the resources to mount such an extensive operation. Just yesterday, Agent Martinez had called to inform Cole that they were close to making arrests. The evidence gathered from Sarah's research, combined with surveillance footage from game cameras and testimony from cooperative witnesses, had built a case strong enough to bring charges. There would be trials and likely convictions, and the illegal trapping would finally end. But there would also be fallout in the community, anger and division that would take years to heal. Cole had accepted that cost as necessary, but it weighed on him nonetheless. Aurora had finished her apple and was now nuzzling Sarah's shoulder with obvious affection. The mare had formed bonds with both of them, but there was something special in how she responded to Sarah, almost as if she understood on some deep level that this human had been willing to die trying to free her from that trap. Sarah stroked the mare's neck and whispered words of gratitude and love that Cole could barely hear over the wind. "You should ride her," Cole said suddenly, the idea forming as he spoke. Not to break her or train her in the conventional sense, but to share an experience with her, to see if she'll accept that level of partnership. Sarah turned to him with surprise. "I've never ridden a horse in my life," she admitted, "and Aurora has never had a rider. Don't you think that's asking too much of her?" Cole shook his head. "I think she's been asking us to understand her on her own terms, and maybe this is how we do that. Not through force or dominance, but through invitation and acceptance. If she says no, we respect that. But if she says yes," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "then we'll know for certain that she's chosen this life, this place, us." They prepared carefully, Cole explaining the basics of equine body language and how to approach Aurora with respect rather than assumption. Sarah climbed the fence and dropped into the pasture, moving slowly toward the mare with open hands and calm energy. Aurora watched her approach without fear, her ears forward with interest rather than back with alarm. When Sarah reached her side and placed a gentle hand on her withers, the mare turned her head and regarded the woman with those knowing eyes. Cole had brought a thick saddle blanket, nothing more. No saddle, no bridle, no bit or reins that might remind Aurora of captivity and control, and he handed it to Sarah, who folded it and carefully placed it across the mare's back. Aurora shifted her weight but didn't move away, didn't show any signs of distress or rejection. Sarah looked back at Cole with wonder and something like reverence, understanding that what was happening here transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal. With Cole's help and Aurora's surprising cooperation, Sarah mounted the mare for the first time. She sat lightly, her hands tangled in Aurora's mane for balance, her legs gripping gently rather than demanding. For a long moment, nothing happened. Horse and rider stood perfectly still in the winter pasture, breathing together, learning the feel of each other. Then Aurora took a step, then another, beginning to walk in slow circles around the field with Sarah on her back. Cole watched from the fence with his heart in his throat. This was trust on a level he had rarely witnessed. Two beings who had saved each other's lives now choosing to continue that connection in this new way. Aurora could have bucked or bolted, could have rejected this unprecedented experience with the force and fear that defined most wild horses' responses to their first riders. Instead, she walked calmly, even proudly, as if she understood the significance of what she was offering. They made 3 complete circuits of the pasture before Sarah slid down from Aurora's back, her legs shaking with emotion and exertion. She wrapped her arms around the mare's neck and wept, releasing weeks of pent-up fear and gratitude and wonder. Aurora stood steady, accepting the embrace with patience and what might even have been affection, her head lowered to rest against Sarah's shoulder. Cole climbed the fence and joined them in the pasture, and for a moment the 3 of them stood together in the fading afternoon light, bound by experiences that had changed them all irrevocably. The mare who had been wild and was choosing domestication, the scientist who had nearly died and was learning to live with new purpose, the rancher who had spent decades alone and was discovering what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains in shades of orange and gold, Cole and Sarah sat on the ranch house porch watching Aurora graze peacefully in the pasture. Snowdrift had joined her, and the 2 horses moved together in the easy companionship of herdmates. The sight filled Cole with a contentment he had never known before, a sense that all the scattered pieces of his life had finally found their proper arrangement. "She's staying," Sarah said, though it wasn't really a question. "She's made her choice." Cole nodded, his hand finding Sarah's and their fingers intertwining with the same natural ease that Aurora had shown in accepting her new life. "She's staying," he confirmed. "And so am I," Sarah added softly. "If you'll have me. Not just as a guest or a research partner, but as something more." Cole turned to look at her, seeing in her face the same courage and determination that had kept her alive in the frozen wilderness. "I'd like that," he said simply. "Because sometimes the most important things needed the simplest words. I'd like that very much." In the pasture, Aurora raised her head and looked toward the porch where they sat, and Cole could have sworn she nickered her approval. The mare who had led him through a blizzard to save a stranger's life had done more than rescue Sarah Chen. She had rescued them both from lives half-lived, from the slow resignation that came from believing that safety required solitude, and that connection always carried too high a price. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distant mountains wolves were howling, reclaiming territory that had been denied them for too long. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The investigation would continue, and the community would struggle with the revelations to come. But tonight there was peace in this small corner of Montana, where a wild horse had chosen trust over fear, where 2 people had found each other through extraordinary circumstances, and where the future stretched out with all the promise and possibility of the endless prairie itself.